Welcome to Common Sense Medicine, the audio experience. Welcome back to the Common Sense Medicine podcast, where we joke about our existential dread and never getting a job because we're in school forever. I'm joined by my med school friend who is a BSMD, and we're going to be talking about some of the questions that we're getting from viewers, and they hit us up on social media, and if you don't know, it's at CS Medicine, so if you have any questions, our DMs are open on CS Medicine on Instagram and Twitter, so if you have any questions about BSMD, applications, essays, anything, we can answer them on the podcast. So we're going to be talking about the BSMD application process. We already talked about that in another video and a podcast. So check out all the clips and episodes on the channel page, which is linked down below, and subscribe to the channel. So the first thing that I was going to talk about was why we applied to BSMD programs, because we already saw our pre-med friends applying to medical school now that we're in 2020, and after these 4 years, they're applying to schools that we won't get the chance to apply to. And a lot of people ask me when I apply to the BSMD program, why are you doing this? You're kind of signing away your life to a school that you may not necessarily want to go to after 3 years. And honestly, I think that's a good question to ask and to start on. So for me, I thought that BSMD programs were just a really good way to not have to think about the process, and thinking about the process and the process of application was that much more crucifying, or like that much more troublesome to me, rather than just going into a school that I may not like to go to because of some unforeseen difficulty. You know, I'd rather have a surefire shot and knowing what I'm getting into rather than have the uncertainty of applying and all of that process, because I saw it in college applications and I didn't want to go through it again. But yeah, Varun, what do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with your point. And one thing that was pretty important to me is that when you think about it, right, you're in high school, you're trying to do extracurriculars, you're trying to get a good GPA, you're trying to get a good SAT score so you can get into a good college. And if you're someone who is trying to go into the medical field, you know, specifically as an MD, speaking from experience, then in college, you'll be trying to get a good GPA, you'll be trying to do more extracurriculars, i.e. research in particular, and then you'll also be trying to get a good MCAT score, so yet another standardized test. And then when you get to medical school, it's like a third iteration of that process. You're trying to do well in your classes, obviously. Maybe if you're trying to shoot for AOA, then you need to do extremely well. If your school happens to have it, then you need to be trying to do well on, you know, the step one, which is now way more important than either the SAT or the MCAT. In terms of relative to how it impacts your application. And then on top of that, you have to also be trying to do extracurriculars, especially research. Research is now even more important than ever. And all three of those times, you're also going through, you know, the application and the interview process where, you know, you're traveling all around the country, talking to all these people where they ask you, you know, the same 5 questions. Why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a doctor? Why this specialty? Why this specialty? You know, over and over and over again. And I feel like at a certain point, you know, it's when you're doing sort of that same rinse and repeat process for 4 years, 3 times in a row, I feel like it's extremely easy to burn out. And that was exactly how I felt at the end of my senior year of high school. I felt super burned out. Yeah. I did not want to open another book. You know, I was done studying for the SAT. I was done talking to med. I was absolutely done talking to med school deans and everything. You know, I had to go through basically a med school interview process myself.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I feel like that was really important because I was able to take those 3 years in my BSMD undergrad years where I didn't have to worry about that process again. And I could take it as like sort of a mental reset. And then it allowed me to sort of jump into med school with like a full steam ahead kind of approach, you know, like I was all ready to just go again.
Yeah, I think that's important because people don't understand the value of breaks. So I did the same BSMD program, and then we both took some time off before we even got to medical school. So that kind of unique experience before medical school, people say take a gap year, but even in the gap year, people are working, they're trying to apply to medical school. And even though they get the experience of the real world, they're still working hard. And with the traditional pre-med experience, you just don't get to relax. And I think with our program, it's kind of unique in that you can tailor it to how you want because our advisor is so flexible with what options you can do. And I think that's a really important thing to look for in BSMD programs because I didn't apply to a lot. And this one really stuck out to me because it really seemed that the students had freedom to do whatever they wanted. Literally, like if you wanted a degree, you could get a degree, you could travel, you could study abroad. And our advisor was really open to options because he recognized the importance of extending yourself in exploration, even in a shortened program.
You could start a podcast.
Yeah. I'm trying to gain my social media following, baby. So I think we should start with the viewer question. So one viewer asked, she got accepted to a research program this summer, but coronavirus and college admission officials wouldn't give much value to one summer of research. So I think we are uniquely positioned to talk about this because I know you did research in high school. I only did one summer of research in high school, but I think that she was wondering they wouldn't give much value to just one summer of research compared to others and who are published and are ISEF finalists, etc. So feels like she's stuck at a dead end because she doesn't have the experience. So I wanted to talk about the value of research, how you can get involved in research as a high school student, and I also wanted to talk about what makes you stand out when you do research, because now everyone and their mother are doing research, right? It used to be that not many high school students did research, but now people are so outstanding that they're doing PhD or even graduate level research. I wouldn't say PhD, but maybe graduate level. Graduate level research when they're in high school, right? Like in terms of undergrad students, they're doing lab tech work, but high school students are also doing that lab tech work. So I mean, at least like close to a graduate level researcher, right? If you're researching in the lab every day in the summer, right? I would say so. I don't know. What do you think? Like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Like, it's like three different questions, but I think we can start with like, now that everyone's doing research, it kind of feels like you're pressured to start research. What do you think the value of research is in the application process?
So I think it's like, 4 or 5 years ago when I was applying to BSMD in the first place, I actually found that research was an incredible like advantage I thought that I had in my application. Just about every single med school dean I talked to would ask about my research. They would say, oh, I noticed that you did research in this lab. Can you tell me what you did? And then I would often talk about that. And I was also able to have publications with that. So I was able to talk about my publications with them as well. So I think that it becomes a great talking point, especially since, every BSMD program nowadays has like a med school interview with, some doctors there. And since doctors are also intimately familiar with the research program, either maybe they're with the research process, either they're conducting research on their own or they've done research in the past during, their education, that it really becomes a great talking point for these doctors when, you had the interview. And that's really what you want to be. You want it to be a fulfilling conversation where they really are impressed by the achievements that you've done in college. And just to piggyback off of that, if you're able to publish your research and, that's an achievement that not only will be extremely valuable for applying to BSMD programs, but it's going to stick with you your entire life. I published in high school, and those publications are still on the forefront of my resume to this day, and they will continue to be. I mean, I know I've talked to people in who've applied for very competitive fields in residencies. And some of those fields, especially the ones that really emphasize research, have even asked them about research projects that they were doing all the way back in high school because they noticed that they had been doing research for such a long time. So I really would highly recommend to try and get involved in research. I think it's just an incredibly valuable experience that you will be able to reap the benefits of it for pretty much your entire career, more or less.
I think that it's an important point to say that having research on your resume is an asset, and for many students, they feel like they don't have that, and it feels like a knock to their resume. But I would add that some of these students who are doing research, they have labs near them, and they have that edge in terms of they might have a contact in a lab, for example, etc. But I think this student in particular was confused because she didn't have any research experience, and she was going to get this research experience over this coronavirus pandemic happening, and it kind of got canceled. So I think she was concerned that she didn't have that experience, so she was not going to do well. First of all, I just wanted to tackle this two things. So you said that research really helps your application and you were able to talk about it. I think that research as a catch-all word is very ambiguous and vague. I think the value of research comes in when med school deans or admissions committees look at the student and say, this person has a scholarly intent in terms of research is a big part of productivity as you get into your assistant professorship and later on. So in terms of measuring your productivity that way, people are very used to that metric in terms of having publication equals a person who is contributing to the literature equals a person who is doing well in their career. That proxy metric is always there. So I think for the people who are on these admissions committees, to them, it seems like these publications tie directly to your ability to become a good student in the medical school and also become a very attractive applicant when it comes time for your match. So I think using that research experience there, predicting that you will become that type of physician as you grow older, So even though it's a big bet and a lot of people do research just to get into BSMD programs and they're not very inclined on research after medical school, it does have that predictor or the predictive ability that they will like research as they get into their undergraduate and graduate medical education. I think that's the main value for the application from a admissions committee standpoint. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I'll add caveat that I feel like when it comes to research in medical school versus research in, high school, especially high school and to an extent undergrad, productivity may not always be is not always the be all end all. And from what I mean from that is that when you're applying to residencies and you're looking at your body of research, they're really looking at your publications, what you've actually come out with, your results.
Yeah.
But I found that even if you don't have a publication and if you're in high school, for example, and you're applying to BSMD programs, even if you don't have a publication, that's not, if anything, that's not a bad thing in of itself. A publication is really nice to have, but you're going to get a lot of those, especially if you're going to the medical field later down the line, if you do a lot of research and you're published and you're working with that intent. But in the first place, having that experience in the first place is incredibly valuable because when you're being evaluated by BSMDs, you're not just being evaluated by the college, but also the medical school. And they want to see, are you going to be a good fit for their medical school when you get to that time? And the fact that even if you aren't publishing, the fact that you're doing research, like what you said, it shows that scholarly intent that when you finish your undergrad and you come to our medical school, we know that you're going to be productive and you're going to be trying to do research even then. And that is shown by the fact that even as early on as high school, you're trying to do research. So don't feel like if you aren't publishing in a high impact journal in Cell as a high school sophomore, figuring out some novel pathway or biomarker or something like that, you shouldn't feel like that. Even if you just have a summer of just doing bench work where nothing 100% really came of it, that's still incredibly important to add to your resume and to talk about with during your application process.
For sure. I would say that for me, research was only a small part of my application. And while I did have research experience, I didn't have any publication, so to speak, at the end of my research tenure. I did have a poster, I did have a few presentations, but likely when we're talking about publications, we're talking about publicly indexed articles in terms of on PubMed, right? So that's the one thing that I would say. I only had one summer of research. So to answer this girl's question, I was going to talk about how to go about getting a research position, because a lot of people were asking me that in terms of how do I find a research position now that it's Corona, it's virtual, and I won't have anything to say what I did during Corona, right? A lot of students are saying, I want to do research about the COVID pandemic, but I don't know what to do. So I guess we can attack this through two questions in terms of what skills would you need to have to do this virtual research if you're trying to do COVID research, and second, how should they go about getting a research position if they don't have any contact or if they don't have any way to get into a lab otherwise?
Mm-hmm.
I think we can start off with the first question first, which is what skills do they need to conduct virtual research? Because a large part of the research that we do in med school is database research because it kind of shows clinical outcomes. So I think we can talk about definitely that, and then I guess we can move on to the next topic.
Yeah. So I think one of the key things that I found in, first of all, knowing how to, a lot of doctors that I talk who that, have been using databases. I've been working with, several doctors who do record, their patient outcomes and everything in databases. Obviously, some of the baseline things is having a good foundation in like statistics in terms of understanding when things are significant, how to be able to run a t-test, how to be able to basically determine statistical trends, generate figures, that sort of thing, as well as, and you can also just do that basically by manipulating Excel sheets. However, I found that especially if you're working with things like public databases, like for example, there's something called like HCUP, which is like the human, like it's like called like HCUP. It's like the human. I'm sorry, I'm gonna look this up for a minute.
All good.
So what HCUP is, before while I look up the acronym, what it actually stands for, it's basically a massive public database of inpatient data.
It's like CPT
called the healthcare
codes.
Cost and utilization.
Oh, got it.
So I think So it's like it'll have like all for example, if you have like a single hospital case, it'll say like what they were in for, maybe what was the age, what was the race, what hospital were they treated at, maybe what was the cost, what were like the procedure codes / medical codes or ICD codes that were used to track them. And then if you imagine that, but for every single person that ever gets that ever goes to the hospital or is ever taken in, then that basically creates this this massive array of data. And when you're working with those, sometimes, and they're oftentimes, as you can imagine, these sheets are way too large for Excel documents alone.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I would highly recommend trying to learn some sort of statistical analysis software. I can recommend things like SPSS, R, or SAS. You can look them up online. There's plenty of online tutorials. And I think that would be, like, if I were talking to someone where it's like, they say, I want to go to medical school, and it's the summer before medical school, after my senior year of college or whatever, and I had nothing to do, and I want to maybe do something to help prepare myself, I would say devote some time during your summer to learning one of those languages. It can be any one of those because they all will more or less be able to accomplish the same thing. I think SPSS was the most intuitive and the easiest to learn. I have experience in SAS, R, and SPSS, and I can tell you that I think SPSS is the easiest
for sure.
three. But like basically, I'm saying hypothetically, if I was talking to someone and they're like, I want to get involved in virtual research, I would say learn that, and then when you're talking, if you're trying to talk to someone who's a PI or a doctor or something, or just anyone who's you're trying to do research under, tell them that you can use it. Say that I am experienced in this coding language. You'll find that a lot of doctors have the experience in the medical and the sciencey part, but when it comes to the actual statistical part, the software, operating the software, they're often very, very underexperienced, and that's sort of their limiting factor in their ability to publish projects and do these projects and everything. If you're someone who can bring those skills to the table, think of that sort of a job interview. If you can bring these pertinent, unique skills to the table, then they will be much more likely to take you in and see you as an asset to their work.
I definitely agree, and I think contacting these PIs is an art form of its own in terms of marketing yourself. So to answer the second question, you answered the first one perfectly. I think to answer the second question, I would just use a template that you find online, or just a template with all of the prerequisites that you need to ask for a job, in terms of, these are my relevant experiences, this is what I like that you do, and if it's possible, do you mind if I can learn some skills under you? I can bring this to the table. And seeing that you have the statistical tests and the statistical software all under your belt, I think that it's not a far cry to say that they would be very willing to teach you the sciencey part, or at least some of the sciencey part, while they talk about how to do the statistical software. Because I think the statistical tests are very easy to run. It's just knowing when to run one or the other.
Yeah.
So generating the frequencies is very easy once you know how to do it. It's just knowing what to do is the purview of the PI, and having their experience and having their recommendation and their blessing to get to the point where you also are going to learn all of these in medical school and in residency. I think that's the point where you want to get to. So learn the little things, because in medical school and residency, when you have to learn the sciencey part and you have to teach someone how to run the statistical test, you will be that much better equipped to do so because you have experience in both domains. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think
So I think maybe oh, sorry, what were you saying?
no, continue. I was just going to say that you'll just be that much more alluring to residencies as well as a physician, as an associate professor, it'll be easier for you to teach other people what you've gone through.
Yeah. I think we should maybe also talk a little bit about just the art of like the cold email because a
Yeah,
lot of people they don't have contacts and everything.
for sure.
So I think it's important to know that like it's not just about sending one. Very rarely are you going to send one email and then
Yeah,
immediately get like
yeah,
a response and have something work out.
for
I
sure.
can tell you from my experience that has never happened to me. Every time I've been in situations where I've had to cold email, I've had to send to like a lot of PIs before I even got like one response,
Hmm.
because the fact of the matter is not everyone is looking for someone new to add to their lab. Not everyone, especially not everyone, is looking for a high school student. Usually they see undergrads as like the people that really
Yeah,
start to do research. Only now that more and more high school students are starting to enter the research field. So right now you're going to meet a lot of people who think, do I want to trust a high schooler with research? And the answer, for a lot of people, the answer is going to be no. So what I can suggest is that you want to find, like, for example, maybe if you have a medical school that's near you, you can maybe find like the email addresses or something of a lot. Oftentimes they'll publish like contact information, especially emails for a lot of these people.
right.
And you could just go down the line and, send them and then have like a template, like as Sri was talking about before, just like dear Dr. Blank, and then talk about who you are, what skills you bring, what you're trying to do, why you're interested in their project, and you'll have to maybe change you'll have to change what you actually send to them each time
Yeah,
to tailor to their specific project. But you just keep sending that over and over and over again. If I have any specific advice, I would say try to send these emails in the morning, like maybe like 8 or 9 in the morning, because a lot of
for
people
sure.
are there in the morning and they're sort of checking their emails the first time. And these people get a lot of emails to their school address. So if you send like an email at like 9, in the evening when they're not checking their email, by the time it gets to the morning, maybe they've gotten a bunch of emails from them that sort of buried your email to them down like in their inbox, and they end up never seeing it. So try to send it to them, in the morning when they're most likely to maybe be at their desk and their computer and like seeing it. And just don't be discouraged if you don't get replies initially. You just have to keep sending more and more cold emails until you finally get one.
Yeah, I think if you send 300 emails and you don't get at least one response, I would be very, very surprised. I think
Yeah.
that this is not the hardest thing that is in your application process. This is very much in your control. If you really want research, you can get a research experience by emailing around. It may not be the best research experience in terms of your PI might not be very receptive, but you'll have research on your CV, and you'll be able to talk about it during your application.
Yeah.
Talking about the hardest thing that I had to do for college, one of the things that I thought that we could cover was the personal statement, because a lot of people have been asking me, how should I write my essays? Because it's getting to that point in time when people are really thinking about what experience that I had in high school really shaped my ability to apply to these types of programs. And I think I'm just going to start off by saying you're probably not going to have a defining experience which really told you out of the womb that you're going to be a doctor. I certainly didn't. I think what I included in my essay was a very candid experience that I had at a volunteer experience that I had, and it was at the nursing home. So I think that knowing your style of writing is the first thing that you should think about before even putting a pen to paper. It's just, you have to write many drafts, so just be ready for that. But I think knowing yourself and how you write best is one of the biggest things that you should know before getting into the process. I think that including different stories is very good if you're able to weave all those stories together. But that's just my writing style. I like starting off with a hook and then including 3 or 4 stories that really support that main point and then bring it all together with the same metaphor that I started with. But that's just my structure. What do you think about personal statements and how you wrote yours?
So I guess I could just talk a little bit about like what my personal statement was. So I did the classic. So I guess I can give advice in terms of if you're writing, for example, like a personal failure or a struggle that you may have had, because I know that's since that's a very popular topic, especially in Common App essays and just essays in general. So like as I mentioned before, I did a lot of research in high school, and I started in my summer of freshman year. And initially, I was pretty bad. Honestly, I just think at the time I just didn't really have the mental maturity to like understand what doing research entailed. I would mess up like tasks I had to do pretty regularly, and it would result in wasting lab time, lab money, and lab resources. And what happened was initially I actually almost they basically told me like, if you keep making mistakes, we're not going to want you to come work in this lab anymore because you keep messing up. And when you mess up, you're wasting lab time and you're wasting hundreds of dollars in reagents that come out of our grant money. So you can't continue to keep making these mistakes and taking such a lackadaisical attitude towards what you're doing, towards your work here. You're working with PhDs, you're working with doctors, you're working with people who do this for a living, and we can't afford for you to keep messing up and impeding our progress. And I think that was really when it sort of like a slap in the face for me, and it really woke me up and made me realize. And then from there, I just kind of like, I guess I just buckled down. I really started making sure I was taking utmost care whenever I was doing anything, and I really started working towards bettering my technique, my lab techniques, and trying to produce productive data and being a productive member of their lab. And it consummated in me being able to publish with them, and as well as participate in science competitions in my senior year. So that was sort of the structure of my essay, where I initially talked about how I got in and I sort of took it easy, and then I messed up, and then they kind of told me, and then I sort of brought like a turnaround to how I then eventually was able to become like a productive member of the lab, and it became an incredibly fulfilling experience and made me want to go into the medical field and continue to pursue research as an endeavor. And I guess my advice for sort of trying to frame an essay where you're trying to talk about a personal struggle or a personal failure is not to focus too much time on the failure. If you write your entire essay about how like you messed up, then that's just going to make you look like an idiot. They're going to think, oh, this dude,
for sure,
my high school experience was getting kicked out of the lab. That's like
yeah.
Who's going to want to see that? You want to sort of, and you want to balance it as well. You don't want to make it like you're like always framing yourself as being, in the right, or as like, being justified. It's okay to admit that you made a mistake, because it shows humility. It shows that you're able to learn from mistakes when you make them. Since, it doesn't matter if you're a high school student, an undergrad, a medical student, a resident, an attending the chair of a department. You're going to make mistakes. They're going to happen. And that sort of essay that I kind of wrote, it can sometimes demonstrate, that like this is how this person bounces back from making mistakes or from, having a brief personal failure. They can bounce back from that, learn from it, improve from it, and then make themselves a better person, and then ultimately still become productive even in the face of these errors. They didn't simply give up at the first sign of adversity.
Yeah.
So it's really just about understanding that balance of how much you want to allocate to the failure part and how much you want to allocate to how you responded, since the focus is how you respond to that, how you changed your mindset or what you did in order to rectify this and then grow as a person from that. That's really the focus and what you want to be talking about.
I think the main thing that you're saying is really accurate in terms of your own personal experience. If you're talking about a personal foible, always make sure that you're shown in the best light, because this is a marketing application at the end of the day. You're marketing your own self for this position of a BSMD student. And I just wanted to get your take. If they did say, I want to write about a personal foible or a application that takes on some personal struggle that they had, how would you structure your essay in terms of, you talked about one story the entire time, or did you talk about other experiences that you had in high school while you did this research that may have contributed to you getting better at research and kind of doing better in high school in general?
So I think it depends on like the topic or like what the essay was that I was specifically talking about. For this specific thing, I was talking about my Common App essay, so I kind of focused on that story alone.
Oh, true, yeah.
So like my personal opinion on Common App essays, I value like a lot of focus in the application. Like if you're going to talk about like multiple things in your Common App essay, they should all tie together with a very strong common theme, so you have a very cogent essay. If you're kind of just rambling about random like different activities or stories or encounters in your life that makes your essay kind of lose a lot of focus. It doesn't really give the people that read your essay like a strong idea of what you're trying to convey to them through your essay. You have to, I think that like you should really, I think like the biggest thing I would say when trying to craft your personal statement is choose one thing. It's like choose like one idea or one thing you really want to tell the person you're reading your essay, and then focus your entire essay around that. And it can be multiple stories or multiple things. For example, I know you just said that you talked about like multiple stories or multiple experiences you had, but tied them all into a specific theme.
Yeah.
See, in that way, even though it was multiple stories, your focus was this theme, and that's what the message you were trying to convey to them was. In my case, it was just one story, but I was also trying to convey my own experience with failure and how I bounced back from it and the lessons I learned. So I think that's really the biggest takeaway I can give to a lot of people is, make sure your comment essay is like focused as possible.
Yeah. I think to tie it all together, the principles that we learned was just make sure it's really focused, make sure that you use a meaningful experience where you learned something or you grew from the experience, because you can't put that into your CV or your application activities. You can only tell that through a story that you have to learn from and grow from, because they're looking from when you were 14 to when you were 18. There's a lot of personal growth that happens during that time and a lot of experiences that you have. The college admissions officer is just looking for what makes you different, what makes you have that growth. I think an exercise that can really help you is writing down the qualities that you see in a physician or that you see in a college level adult who has those qualities in terms of compassion, caring, etc. And when you find out what those qualities are, find stories that may, or moments that may explain why you are the way that you are over those 4 years, and see whether any one of them can be expanded into a bigger moment. And obviously you're going to have to exaggerate some of the details in terms of you might not be feeling exactly what you are writing in these essays. There's a very flowery language to kind of get the attention of the viewer, but I think, or the reader, but I think that at most they're going to spend, 5 minutes on this application essay. So I think that if it's focused, if it catches the eye and it reads like a story, a very catching story, you are well on your way to marketing yourself, because it's basically an ad, right? If you make it catchy, if you make it not flashy or kind of tawdry, but like very focused and to the point of how it espouses your traits that you had written down, it's really a very good addition to your app. And I would say that the 5 minutes that the reviewer spends is very well spent, rather than just looking at your CV. I think that the application is one thing, but talking about interviews for the BSMD process, so a viewer messaged me and asked about the interview process, which I did cover in a specific video, but I didn't cover how different medical schools approach the medical school interview. One of the programs that she was applying to was going to use the mini medical interview format, which is cases. You move from one station to the next. I've never had experience with this, but I know you have, Varun, because you've been around the BSMD circuit. So she wanted to know our perspective on it. I can speak somewhat to it because I know of the process, but I've never personally been through it. So I was going to ask you.
Yeah. So actually only one of the programs I had at the time. I know that there have been other programs that have adopted we call it the MMI. So I have adopted the MMI like lately, but like back when I was applying, only one of the programs I actually applied to had it. And I think one of the biggest things that you can take away from it is as much a mental battle as it is, as it is just like asking these questions in terms of like your own mindset. So like if, you go to a state, like one of the advantages of sort of the MMI is that since you have many, many different interviewers, if you mess up in like one of the stations, for example, it's not the end of the world. If you have a single interviewer and you give a poor impression, that really can hamper your chances of getting into the program. But if you have, 10 stations, like I don't remember, I think I had like 14 stations for my MMI. Mm-hmm. If you mess up on one, then you still have the other 13 that you can, do really well on and that you can impress. So that's something that you have to keep in mind constantly when you're there. If you feel like you didn't give a great answer to a question or a satisfactory answer to a station, just shrug it off. When you're walking to the next station, put that in the back of your mind. What happened there happened. Don't let it affect you when you're going to your new station. Every single station will be a fresh experience. And in that vein, in terms of fresh experiences, you're going to get the MMI will be a mix of some very standard questions and some just very out there weird tasks for you. So, for example, I had one where it was just I walked in, the person asked me, "Why do you want to be a doctor?" And then I had like I don't remember the station duration was like 10 minutes or something like that, and she was like, "Why do you want to be a doctor and why this program specifically?" Mm-hmm. So I had 10 minutes to really talk to her about that and like what things and like that was like the most vanilla like station out of all of them. That's like you get that pretty much in any single medical interview you have. In one of them, it was really weird. You were partnered up with another interviewer. Mm-hmm. Another interviewee. And what happened was they would give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and then you would have. And what would happen is they would give another they would basically give a picture to the other person, and then that person would have to describe to you the picture, and you would have to basically draw it. Like, if, for example, they give you like a house, without like saying what it was, you would have to draw they would have to basically tell you what to draw on your blank sheet of paper, and you couldn't see what they saw. So I guess it's sort of like a game of like telephone in the way where you kind of have to like draw what the other person was like telling you just based off of verbal commands, which I thought was like really weird. But I guess what they were trying to go for there was like how well can you basically how well can you give instructions, in a clear manner that other people can like understand. I'm just kind of spitballing here. I don't really know what the purpose of that is, but like they can really throw some out there stuff, and that's just an example, So it's just like you do have to be prepared for some very out there, just some out there cases. I know, for example, one station almost always will be one where you have to pretend to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. So you'll talk to the patient will pretend to be maybe someone who has cancer, and then you have to pretend to be a doctor and consult them on their cancer. And what they're looking for in that specific station is not that you're able to give them a prognosis or that you, like, for example, know some random medical trivia about cancer. Though obviously I think you should have a basic idea on what a disease is. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important things you can like what they're really looking for there is that you're able to sort of demonstrate the qualities that are becoming of a physician, that you show empathy. You say like, "I'm really sorry you have to experience this. I know cancer is a very, very deadly disease, and we don't understand a lot of it. But rest assured, we'll be there to support you every step of the way, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we can free you of this disease." And just showing that sort of empathy and those I guess humanistic traits that are so important for a doctor to show just beyond, the knowledge. What they're really showing there is, I guess what they're trying to demonstrate to you there is that the knowledge part is irrelevant. But what's relevant is how you talk to the patient and treat them as a fellow human being. So that's something that you should really focus on if you happen upon a station that's of that nature, because I can guarantee you that especially if you go for multiple MMIs, you will run into at least one of them where you'll have a station where you have to consult a pretend patient. So I think really I think MMIs are just incredibly exhausting experiences. I remember being incredibly tired after mine. I don't think I've ever felt so like mentally just like burned in my entire life after I finished mine. But like, cause it was basically like an hour straight of just like constant, just like putting your 100% of concentration into one thing for like an hour and a half straight. And it was just incredibly exhausting with only like one rest station in the middle. So really it's just a matter of endurance, just make sure to shrug off. If you feel like you did really well, if you feel like you didn't do well on one station, shrug it off. If you feel like you've been doing really well and you're struggling with one station, sort of relax and take some consolation that it's okay. This is just one station. That's probably not going to make or break your decision. And it's just hard to say. I guess it's just really a game of mental fortitude and, can you endure it? And I think if you just keep those things in mind, I think you'll be able to do it.
Got it. So I think for the viewer that was asking that question, Varun basically laid out his experience and what he thinks the main qualities are. at least for me, hearing it for the first time, I think it can be boiled down to what should I improve on? You should improve on your mental fortitude, your resilience, so to make sure that you can get through all of the stations. You can also be ready for the unpredictable in terms of that experiences that you had for communication versus the doctor situation versus the why you want to be a doctor. Some of them are very predictable, some of them aren't, and you just have to be ready for the stations that you're going to have those wacky questions so you will be able to answer them during the interview. I kind of covered that in the other video where I said that they might ask you, what's your favorite animal or something like that, and why? And it may not make sense on the surface, and it's not supposed to make sense. They're just trying to see how you react to a question that's way out of left field. So I know one of my interviewers for college, it wasn't for a BSMD program, but they asked me how many tennis balls are there in the United States. So I think he just wanted to see my critical thinking in terms of how do I respond to a word problem, right? And it was a very weird question to me, but and I didn't answer it in a way that was good, I think, now looking back, but I think the way that he wanted me to go through it was explain my mode of thinking. So even if you don't know a question, you should definitely explain what you're thinking to get through a quote-unquote word problem, but in real life. For example, for that tennis ball question, you can say, oh, okay, the U.S. has 300 million people. Based on statistics or whatever, I think that about 10% of them are tennis players, so 3 million. So, 1% of them are tennis players. It's about 3 million people. 3 million people have 2 tennis balls on average, and they have 1 tennis racket. So I would say that it's about 6 million tennis balls in the United States. So just, even though you're pulling numbers out of thin air, I think that explaining your thinking and how you got to that mode of reasoning is what they want to see, because you're not going to know how many tennis balls there are in the United States, obviously, but you can give a cogent explanation based on data that you're given. So if he says, or if you ask how many tennis players are there in the United States, he's going to be like, 3%. And then you could kind of back calculate based on that. I think that asking the right questions is also important for an interview. And even in the mini medical interview, I don't know how much time you had at each station, but if they do give you time to ask questions of the interviewer and they're asking you to solve a word problem or they're asking you to do a task, definitely be very clear about what they're asking you to do, because you don't want to use your whole time doing something that they didn't ask you to do and leaving a bad taste in their mouth that you didn't fulfill the task at hand. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that that's basically all that I had, and if the viewers have any more questions, like I said, on social media or on the website, there's a contact form. It's very easy to contact us. I'm going to leave it in the description below. And as far as updates, I was going to make a new video on car strategies, because that's kind of the most popular video on the channel, and a lot of people have been asking about like how to do car strategy. So maybe we can cover that on the next podcast, and how you approach a cars passage, maybe do a cars passage with some of our friends and how they rationalize through the different ones, because I know you guys all did really well on the MCAT, so we could all talk about how we take our individual approach to that. And then also, if you're planning on taking the MCAT and you're listening to this podcast because you're in high school, you're crazy. I'm just saying it. You don't have to think about the MCAT. You don't have to think about anything. But I think that
wraps it. Please don't think about the MCAT. I'm begging you. I'm like begging you. Like I have like flashbacks. Like I was talking about just like images in my mind of like some of those ridiculous.
The MCAT doesn't exist. Just think that the MCAT doesn't exist. It's okay. I think that wraps it up for this video. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and talking about your experience, Varun. And I think that this was going to be a lot of help for students who are listening. So thanks again for listening to Common Sense Medicine, where we take time of our day to complain about random things in the medical school world. If you're interested in more things that we go through in medical school, I plugged my social media like 3 times. It's at CS Medicine on Instagram and Twitter. And remember, it's just common sense. Thanks for listening. Peace. Thanks for listening to the Common Sense Medicine podcast. Be sure to visit commonsensemedic.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. Also, if you liked this interview and this type of content, definitely let me know on Twitter and Instagram at CS Medicine. Also, here's the obligatory disclaimer. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing a standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or blog. This blog or podcast are my own opinions and do not represent the views and opinions of my school and employer. I make every effort to broadcast accurate information and invite reputable guests and double-check all of them for my sources before inviting them to the show. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Remember, it's just common sense.